the two biggest concerns we typically have as parents with our kids are their behaviors and their language with kids with autism. So when they're having these behaviors, it's why. And a lot of people, what they do is they chalk it's just their autism. And a lot of professionals do that and families, but they don't seek out these root causes, like in Sam's case, ulcerative colitis. Could they have a headache? Could they have a dental infection? My daughter just recently had that and was having behaviors, and it wound up being something inside of her mouth. So until we start ascertaining what the underlying root issues are, we won't be able to figure out what may be exacerbating these behaviors or their language or any other aspect causing like the brain to be on fire. Basically, it's this neuroinflammation that's occurring in their brains that's leading to this. And if we can quell that, in many cases, we'll see significant improvement.
I would like to welcome our today's guest, Dr. Larry Miller, to Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast. Ever since Larry's oldest son was diagnosed with autism, he has been resolute in his commitment and dedication to healing the symptoms of those diagnosed. Aware of the increasing rates of autism, Larry recognized the urgent need to educate and empower families with the necessary tools to heal their children. For more than 20 years, he has treated children and adults with autism and has played a pivotal role in helping families navigate a healing path. Larry has authored an ebook titled Healing the Symptoms of Autism and created a 12-week autism healing program to empower, guide, and support children and their families on their journey to achieving health and wellness. I am so excited to have Dr. Larry with us today. We're going to share a lot of knowledge, hope, and inspiration. So welcome, Dr. Larry, to Mother's Guide Through Autism.
Oh, thank you, Bridget. It's such a privilege and an honor to be with you and your followers and audience today.
Well, as most of the listeners that follow this podcast, they know that I just generally dive right in because you and I had a few moments to visit. So we're already ready to do all this. And I am just really, I love when guests share their personal journeys with autism. So would you start out with just sharing your personal story of your children and their autism diagnosis?
Absolutely. So my oldest, Sam, he is now 23, and he was developing fine up until about 18 months old, no concerns, speaking, hitting all of his developmental milestones appropriately. And then he wound up having an ear infection, wound up receiving antibiotics for that, wound up getting Tylenol also for the pain. And then subsequently, he was vaccinated about a week later. And then we started to see a decline in his skills. Cognitively, he started having self-stimulatory behaviors. He just wasn't himself, and we started to say, oh, what's happening here? We had never witnessed any sort of behavior like that with him before. He started flapping his arms in front of the TV. And honestly, even with my experience as a physician, I had not really had much exposure to autism at all. This was back in the late 1990s. And, the prevalence of autism back then was 1 in 150. I mean, now, with the CDC's announcement, we're at 1 in 36. So I really had no exposure in my training. And I remember listening to a talk show. I remember Doug Flutie, if you know, the football player, he was talking about his son on this talk show. And I'm saying, oh my goodness, Sam sounds a lot like him. Very, very similar. So I started thinking, oh my goodness, could he have autism? So went home to my wife, and wasn't really on her radar. I mean, we knew that there was something up, but again, he was around 18, 19 months old. So then we started thinking, let's explore this, let's not let it go. We got an appointment to see our developmental pediatrician at the time, and she diagnosed him, with autism. And yeah, it was a shock, and it was honestly devastating because you think, oh my goodness. And I know you talk about how parents can go through this grieving phase, and very much so. We went through that because you're thinking, oh, this is going to be a chronic illness that we're going to be dealing with for the rest of our lives. And how do we cope with it? We have no roadmap. We don't know anybody that's ever experienced this. So and honestly, we really didn't have much guidance from our developmental pediatrician. It was just, you know what, get as much therapy for your child as possible. There's nothing out there that has been proven. You'll hear about gluten-free, casein-free diets. You'll hear about multivitamins, possibly B12 shots, chelation, but none of that has scientific evidence to support it. So I'll see you in 6 months. Try and get as much therapy as you can, and we'll talk again then.
Yeah, that is the reality. And unfortunately, I still hear that from the moms that I coach that have newly diagnosed children on the autistic spectrum. They're given the diagnosis, and like exactly what you're saying. And look how many years ago that was, right? So we definitely have work to do. But when you and your initial reactions, you shared some of that to the autism diagnosis. What were some of the biggest struggles, other than obviously not knowing, hey, what do I do here? See you in 6 months, that you experienced during that time?
Right. So it was, how do we help Sam? Like we didn't have any sort of roadmap or guidance like you had mentioned. And then he must be hurting inside. So what can we do to help him? How can we find somebody? Look, the developmental pediatrician, she's the expert out there, but she's not offering guidance. So yes, we sought out behavioral therapy, speech therapy, OT, started on those, but still there must be something going on in his body. How can I find out what's happening? So I started to explore the medical component of autism. And then I learned about this group called DAN, Defeat Autism Now. This was back in about 2001. And it was basically a grassroots movement of physicians, basically, that were fathers of children with autism. And what they were doing, and Bernie Rimland is another PhD who started the Autism Research Institute. But he was working with some of the docs as well. And he had quite a bit of experience as a psychologist. He also had a son on the autism spectrum. So I went to that conference, and I was absolutely amazed and overwhelmed with the amount of information that these clinicians, it wasn't only doctors, but it was psychologists, it was chiropractors, nutritionists, anybody that could be working with our children, just really teaching me as much as I can learn, but trying to absorb this and internalize it in four days. And I brought it all home to my wife, and I said, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do here. So yeah. Basically that was the starting point for me to say, all right, I need to do whatever I can to learn as much what's going on biomedically in my son, to try and help him, and then hopefully also help other children as well.
Yeah. So being on that journey, what have been some of the successes that you have for you and your children? Like,
sure.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, fast forward with Sam at about 16, he started having some real intense self-injurious behaviors. He was waking up like clockwork, about 3 a.m., and he would be hitting himself as hard as he could in his face, just waking up. And we thought it was a nightmare. You wake up and like, oh my goodness, what's happening? Why is he struggling so much? Could it be his hormones? Could it be something else? Needless to say, he wasn't exhibiting many other symptoms except the behaviors. And he has language, but he couldn't express to us what was going on. Well, we found out later he wound up having ulcerative colitis. So he must have been having such pain in his belly at night, causing him such distress that he was awakening at 3 a.m. because his cortisol levels were peaking, his adrenals were just saying, oh my goodness, my body is hurting. And then he would wake up like somebody having a seizure almost. Same thing was happening with him. So that was a major struggle for us for about a year. Every night, of course, our sleep was I mean, it wasn't all about us, but we would do, almost like when you have a newborn, right? You have a baby and you're just exhausted because you're just not getting the good amount of sleep. And we were just trying to placate him however we can. And so that was a struggle for about a year. And then when we finally got the diagnosis, we were able to control them. We put him on some medication to just try and calm his behaviors down until we were getting to the root cause. That was just really kind of numbing him and making him feel more like a zombie. But, it wasn't the route we wanted to go, but we knew we needed to try and help him, at least in the interim, until we can get to the bottom of what was happening with the colitis and get him better in that regard. So once we started really addressing the colitis, fortunately, he started doing better. So that was one of the major struggles. And we finally realized, like, okay, we kind of overcame that hurdle once we addressed that, and he started feeling better. So that was a major hurdle.
Yeah, that's a big one, because if no one's getting sleep in the house and you don't have any idea of what is causing it, that causes everyone to be completely stressed out, right?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest issues I found, Bridget, with families is when kids are lashing out or exhibiting these behaviors. I mean, the two biggest concerns we typically have as parents with our kids are their behaviors and their language with kids with autism. So when they're having these behaviors, it's why. And a lot of people, what they do is they chalk it's just their autism. And a lot of professionals do that and families, but they don't seek out these root causes, like in Sam's case, ulcerative colitis. Could they have a headache? Could they have a dental infection? My daughter just recently had that and was having behaviors, and it wound up being something inside of her mouth. So until we start ascertaining what the underlying root issues are, we won't be able to figure out what may be exacerbating these behaviors or their language or any other aspect causing like the brain to be on fire. Basically, it's this neuroinflammation that's occurring in their brains that's leading to this. And if we can quell that, in many cases, we'll see significant improvement.
Yeah, I've heard so much and learned so much. That's why I love doing this podcast, because it is about knowledge, hope, and inspiration. So I learned so much from interviewing folks like you. And so you take all this information, and now you've written this book, Healing the Symptoms of Autism. Tell us about this book.
Sure. So what led me down the road of saying, I really feel like I need to come up with some book to try and empower families in order to help their children is I felt like when I was out there on social media, and I'm in, many Facebook groups, there was so many families struggling, so many parents, like, what do I do with this? I've gone to see my doctor and he's helping me, but I really have no roadmap, no guidance where right after I leave the doctor's office with what to do. I mean, maybe I have some answers, but I don't know. Should I start with A, B, C, D? He told me this, but then I can't, when I try and call the office, I don't know what to do. And they don't get back to me. And not just about the doctors, but it's just a matter of like, there's so many questions that are unanswered. So I wanted to try and give families that guide to try and help them do a lot of things on their own, where they can try and figure out what is going on with my child, try and troubleshoot it, and then what kind of tools can be used in order to ameliorate the child. So that was the main impetus for writing the book, was to say, what can I do to help our community get our kids better, really to inspire us, encourage us, and just empower us with all of that information, at least what I had available to divulge.
Yeah, I think anyone who contributes to this mystery, because and my son says that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one. And that's also true for us as parents on this journey. We we have similarities, we have commonalities, but the big one is, finding help, problem solving, like what's going on. And so having a book like Healing the Symptoms of Autism is so great to share. So on behalf of all of us, thanks for writing it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for
Yeah.
giving me the opportunity to discuss it and have it out there for anybody that needs a resource
Yeah. It's so
to
important.
assist them. I-
So
It absolutely is, and I'm sure with you, and I know your son is older than mine, but back over 20 years ago, there really wasn't much. There's many more tools, and there's much more awareness out there now. But we were flying by the seat of our pants now, so it's nice to see that there are more available resources for many families.
yeah. And while we're recording this, it's the month of April, so Autism Awareness Month. So I think this conversation is just perfect for, yeah, we need to become more aware, we need to support each other. And you're not only did you write a book, but you also have a health and wellness clinic that you help families affected by autism. Tell us about your clinic.
Sure. So I I recently came up with a 12-week program essentially to educate and empower parents on what they can do to help their children, with my assistance, of course, and I'm there to help guide them thereafter as well.
Yeah.
I was practicing treating many of the kids, for many years, and I found that I would spend an hour and a half with them, but similar to the experiences that I would have with my son, with my children, was as well intentioned as the doctors or the practitioners are. It's just not enough time to be able to help our kids out. You're there for an hour and a half, but then your next appointment's not going to be for another 3 or 6 months. And to connect with the doctor or even the nursing staff again is very difficult. So I found that there was more of a need to try and provide that immediate resource to families to give them that education in order to help them not only work on their own, but to work with their practitioners as well. Because if they're armed with those tools to be able to go to their practitioner and say, hey, I have a question regarding my diet, I have a question regarding my gut, or about my mitochondria, about methylation, about inflammation, just all the different aspects underlying autism, at least it'll facilitate that whole process for them. So I found that I've been able to, in some cases, the families have been able with my guidance help really heal these children where they're significantly improved. In some cases, where they've lost their diagnosis or where they've recovered,
Oh,
which is just amazing. Because years ago, Bridget, they would say, oh, autism, lifelong diagnosis, there's no chance of recovery. I mean, it's untrue. I mean, I've certainly seen many kids. There were practitioners saying where they've been able to, recover a third of the kids that they treat. And there's another third that say get mild to moderate improvement. And then there's another third that may not improve at all. So, but parents need to realize that there definitely is hope. And your kid can improve and dramatically in many cases. So that was the rationale behind starting the wellness clinic that I started. And I'm so grateful to be able to work with the families and have more of the time that I didn't have before, as a physician, because it just was much more difficult as far as the current paradigm that we have with medicine. It does not make it easy for clinicians to be able to spend that kind of time with their patients and to continue the follow-up, which many of our children who are so fragile really need.
yeah, yeah, that's a great, powerful message that definitely offers hope. So what are some of the protocols that you implement to treat some of the symptoms of autism?
Sure. So each case of autism is unique. So one kid that could say, like Sam I mentioned, I'll give you an example. So Sam, like we mentioned, he had the ear infection, he had antibiotics. So the immune system probably was impacted there. The gut being on antibiotics the microbiome, which is such an important part of regulating our metabolism. It probably eradicated many of the beneficial bacteria in his microbiome when he was on the antibiotics. Could have caused this leaky gut, what we call. And when you have this permeable gut, you could have this leaky brain. And then when you have this inflamed brain, it can lead to autism, right? There's neuroinflammation. So, and then when you take Tylenol, which you had on top of that, Tylenol tends to be a toxin, which is getting a lot of publicity right now for our kids because they have their genetics. They have really this genetic variant that doesn't allow them to detoxify or metabolize Tylenol appropriately. So he got hit with those multiplicity of irritants that affected his system. And in my daughter's case, he did not regress. The majority of kids that we see have the regressive type, like Sam. With my daughter, my wife had parvovirus when she was pregnant with her. So what happened from the get-go, when she came out and she was born, hers was more of a case of infantile autism. She was developmentally delayed very early on, never reached her milestones, didn't regress. So in that case, it was a virus that probably from my wife that was transmitted to Addison, my daughter, caused inflammation of the brain or caused this aberrant inflammatory response. And with her having more vulnerability or genetically susceptibility from us, probably, it led to this inflammatory response in the brain, I speculate, and led to her autism. So the reason I mention that is for each kid, I mean, mine are two good examples because, again, completely different with how their bodies manifested, autism. But so it's trying to figure out and personalize what it is, basically taking a history to say, where did you see the change in your child from starting with pregnancy, going all the way up to current day? And then once we figure that out, then we can work on, is it the gut? Is it the diet? Is it the immune system? Is it mitochondrial dysfunction? Is it neurochemistry in the brain? Is it some toxin, like toxins we hear about? So the major areas that I tend to work on with families, which I feel are lower hanging fruit for the families, are the diet, because the diet has played such a huge role. I mean, right now we know the gluten-free, casein-free diet in about 70% of cases has been effective for our kids in mitigating inflammation in their body. It causes this autoimmune response, causes leaky gut. And again, when you have this leaky gut, food is going to get out of the gut where it's not supposed to, cause this abnormal immune response, and then it affects the brain. And then these kids, and these gluten and dairy bind to opioid receptors in the brain. So our kids have, more behaviors or irritability, almost like people that are on opioids. They're acting goofy. They're not acting themselves. So I feel like working on the diet plays a major role. And I've done pantry makeovers with families because it's not only gluten and casein, we eat so much in the way of processed foods or ultra processed foods nowadays. Now, granted, families are having a difficult time nowadays. They have so many areas to tackle. So it's to say, could you work on the diet? So, because I said, look, we are like a car. If we're not fueling our bodies properly, you want to go with the highest octane, fuel if you can, the best. If we're feeding ourselves, crappy fast food or food that has glyphosate on it, right? That's not organic. It's going to cause this abnormal reaction. It's going to cause more inflammation or cause the body to be on fire, which is going to cause the brain it's fueling the fire instead of fueling the mitochondria, the parts of the body that we need to be strong. So it's basically trying to find out where each child may be affected, which area is not working properly, and we work into that sometimes. We also have lab work to help guide us as well. But the history is one of the most important features, and then the other part, not only the dietary makeover do we do, so trying to also reduce sugar, go with healthy fats, going with more fiber in the diet, going with a whole foods, more plant-based diet. Now, some of the issues we have too, Bridget, is the sensory issues that so many of our kids have. So it's textures, it's taste. So sometimes we have to try and work on, can you hide certain things in the foods to get them more of the vegetables or more of the fiber to help their microbiome work more effectively. So but it's working with families to say, what do you think you can do? Because most importantly, we don't want to stress the families out, because if moms or dads are not in a good place, how can they really help their kids? So I'm not here to overwhelm them. I'll say, look, do you think you could start by eliminating sugar or eliminating gluten, or just one thing at a time? It's trying to meet them halfway to say, what do you think you're comfortable with? So that's one of the major areas I work with. And the other one is really toxins, right? So think about the toxic environment. And this is probably one of the biggest areas that we find not only could be triggers for autism, but just chronic diseases like obesity, dementia, heart disease. There's been a major increase in all of these chronic disorders over the last 50 years. Now, look, autism back in the 70s was at 1 in 10,000. Now we're at 1 in 36. I mean, that is just unconscionable as
Yeah.
far as the epidemic proportion, how, exponentially it has increased. And that coincides with all of these other diseases. So we have to say, what is the main factor, or what are the major factors? And many of the studies are showing that it's the toxicity. And one of the biggest ones is the glyphosate, which is being sprayed on all of our crops, mainly soy, corn, rice, wheat. So if we could go with an organic diet to try and eliminate the glyphosate from those crops, it's going to really help our kids. So I also try and really enforce going with an organic diet as well, even though I know it's going to be a little bit more expensive. However, it's the price that we have to pay for our kids and our health, right? It's important.
Yeah. So if you are, I'm a parent, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm kind of trying to figure out, like, I'm new to this. What are the top 3 things that parents can do to heal the symptoms of autism? Like I know there's a variation, each kid's different, like
Sure.
we're clear on that, but just if we can say 3 general things, what would they be?
Sure. I would say diet is number one. So I would say the greatest impact that I've seen has been going gluten-free, casein-free.
Yeah.
There are some people do well with the specific carb diet. Some people do better with a GAPS diet, or even a keto or paleo diet, believe it or not. But gluten-free is more of tried and true, what we've seen being most effective amongst our kids. Number 2, I would say, is really trying to eliminate toxins like the glyphosate. The glyphosate, going with the organic food, and then really looking around our houses. Like mold is a huge problem for so many of our families. The mycotoxins, which are the toxins that molds produce, are really proliferating in our homes and just wreaking havoc on so many of our children. So I like looking through the house and talking to parents about, is there any leak in the house? Is there any water collections or musty odors, that you're smelling? Because if we can eliminate mold, that's really going to help many of the kids, and many of the toxic products that we use in our homes, like bleach, for instance, we have BPA from plastic. We have parabens, which are different soaps and shampoos, phthalates. So any of these toxins, and just going with the natural versions of those, which eliminate these harsh chemicals, which just really place such a burden on our children's immune systems and their detoxification pathways. Their detox pathways are already compromised, some of it from their genetics, but many kids with autism do not have enough glutathione. And glutathione is the major antioxidant in the body and the best detoxifying molecule that the body uses. So if we're lacking that, we're not supporting it enough, then the toxins are only going to build up more in the body, and the kids are going to become more sick, more inflamed, and then you're going to see more behaviors, less language, and then more physical problems as well. And they can have gross motor and more self-stimulatory behaviors as well. So the diet, the toxins, and then I would say that there are some supplements also that have really been helpful for many of the kids. Now, again, in many cases, we want to personalize it, but the ones that I have found to be most effective have been vitamin D. Many of our kids are deficient in vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids or fish oil, because that's going to mitigate inflammation of the brain, magnesium also helps with detoxification, and it supports about 700 enzymes in the body. And our kids usually are magnesium deficient. Those three tend to work very well for most of our kids. And there are other supplements as well, but a multivitamin, multimineral. The only thing we have to be careful with some of the multivitamin, multiminerals that also provide mitochondrial support is they can be overly stimulating. So many of our kids, for instance, on the B vitamins, who have methylation issues, methylation is this process that allows our bodies to support detoxification, our immune system, and our brains. In many cases, their methylation pathways are not working properly, and the B vitamins support those. But the problem is the B vitamins make many of our kids hyper. So that's where we have to be careful with some of the multivitamins that contain the Bs in them. But yeah, vitamin D, magnesium, and the omega-3s tend to work very well.
Sounds good for all of us.
For everybody.
I was like, I take those.
Yes,
Right?
I do as well.
Yeah, so it's not a bad idea to make it a family affair. If we all started taking them, I think we would all feel a bit better as well.
Right. I haven't found, many downsides to those supplements. I mean, they're like medications, supplements can have side effects. With those three, magnesium on occasion can cause diarrhea, but if you're taking like magnesium glycinate, for instance, versus magnesium oxide, it's not going to cause the gastrointestinal distress. So sometimes it's just the formulation that you take that could have a significant impact upon it.
So which magnesium would you recommend as being less invasive and overall?
Not glycinate.
Yeah.
Magnesium glycinate is the one I found to be most effective with fewest adverse effects.
Okay, because I know that if I were listening to this, I'm like, well, which magnesium do I pick?
Right.
Which
Sure. There are about 10 different types of magnesium citrate, magnesium oxide. So there are quite a few.
Well, this is great advice, and I know that with your kids and just you as a parent and all the things that you've learned, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned as a parent on this journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most importantly, it's our family bond, just maintaining our strength and crying. And it's okay to have those open discussions about things that we're concerned about, because it's really a challenge as far as raising children with autism. There's so many things that they're unable to express to us. I mean, there are high functioning kids that may be able to articulate more of their problems, but the majority of our children just really can't. They're just not in a place to say, I have a headache or I have abdominal pain. So it's just trying to be patient with them, and also as parents, not trying to fix your child and getting so frustrated if something doesn't work out. Because look, we all have our emotions and we all have our threshold for what we can handle. And some of us, when your kids are not doing well, and if you have a lot on your plate, you're going to feel much more stressed and not going to be able to help your child as much. So we want ourselves as parents and our families to be in good places to be able to help our children out. So my wife and I are constantly talking and expressing our feelings and keeping our marriage strong, because I know, look, that's such a troublesome aspect of raising children with autism, is so many of our couples are ending up in divorce because they can't handle all of the stress. Because look, it's not just the medical issues that we're dealing with our children. It's what's going on in school. It's the finances. It's the legal stuff. It's the waivers. It's all the bureaucratic stuff. So there are so many areas, and where do you pick to tackle? And honestly, with our family, I went very early on when I said, Melissa, I'm flying out to this DAN conference, right when Sam got diagnosed, to learn as much information as I can biomedically. I said, why don't you tackle the ABA? component in the therapies. So sometimes you have to divide and conquer, because otherwise you just get overwhelmed. You, as parents, we can't tackle it all. And even amongst, couples that are divorced, you still have to be aligned and on the same page. And that's where I found some of the struggles too, with some of our couples, families where, the couple's divorced. Not always is there agreement upon how to raise the child or what to work on. And, with the diet, like I've had times where, the mom is saying, yeah, gluten-free, casein-free, that's great, I'm going to do it. But dad will say, I just gave him, grilled cheese sandwich, and I got too busy, and it could set things back and could cause some friction. So it's just really collaborating, saying like, and never giving up, never saying it's too late. Because years ago, we used to say, the brain, there's not as much neuroplasticity, where, the brain is already, by the time the kids are 5 years old, it's set and you can't improve anything. Well, that is completely untrue. I've seen kids and adults that I've worked with that are in their 20s or even in their 30s, that it's like, wow, we either add a supplement or we remove a toxin or we all amend their diet. And we've seen, it's like, a cloud's been lifted. It's incredible. So don't give up hope. It's a journey. It certainly isn't a sprint. And you may see some regression along the way with any sort of therapy or modality that you implement. So it's just be patient and just work it through, and, you'll get through it.
Yeah. If you gave, and I know this is hard, I understand this question is kind of hard, but if you were going to give like one piece of advice, what is your top piece of advice that you would give to a parent listening?
Right. So I would say, number one, again, focus on your health. You focus on parents, focus on the parents' health. Number one, make sure you're in a good place, because you know what, if you're not in a good place, you can't help your child be in a good place. So I found that many families where the parents are struggling with anxiety, and rightly so, there's a lot to manage, that they just really can't help their children out. So I would say that that's really the number one piece of advice, is get yourself in a good place, moms and dads, to be able to help your children out.
Yeah.
And your children feel it. I mean, I know when I am stressed, my son starts having more behaviors. There's no doubt about it. And when I'm taking deep breaths and notice, all right, Sam, calm, it's okay. And I'm calming myself down, because I notice when his behaviors escalate, mine can. My blood starts to boil a little bit more. Our adrenaline surge. It's a physiological response, and that's normal. But we have to learn things, and I'm sure you may work on it with your families, and I do as well, whether it's meditation, breath work, and then taking care of our health as well. And whether it's also journaling, gratitude, like all those things that we have to be thankful for in our lives, because our kids are beautiful. Again, they're not broken. It's just many of our kids are sick inside. Their body is inflamed. And just getting to the root of that problem, or the multiple roots, really should help improve their health. And then all around, you'll see improvement in their behaviors, in their language, and in their health in general.
Yeah. And I do think it is a family project for all of us to really take care of ourselves. And I agree with you 100%. And a lot of times parents and the listeners, you need to hear it over and over and over again, how important it is to take care of you before you can really give what you need to give to really be able to, for your kids to benefit. So I love that message, because it's the same message I'm preaching as well, because I know, because I didn't. And as a result, it wasn't good for anybody, right?
Yes, and I hear that so often from many other families too.
Yeah.
It's and that's really the main place that we typically start with many of the programs that I have families involved with their education, is, look, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And also, are parents getting out for date nights? Are they enjoy, again, to keep your marriage healthy? And again, even for the divorced couples, what are you doing as far as individually in order to, have some happiness or some sort of break in your life to be able to get a relief from some of the stress that you're dealing with around autism.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we go?
I'd like to say, thank you so much for providing me the opportunity to have this discussion and, just let families know that, hey, I'm in there with you as far as trying to deal with all of these issues. Even though I've had, experience from different lenses as a physician, as a health coach, and as a dad, I've seen it from all different perspectives. So I know what everybody is going through from all of those different lenses, and just persevere. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to, and talk to other people too. It's great to have a network, because let's be frank, a lot of families don't get autism. Like, a lot of friends don't, unless you're really surrounded by people that understand it, it could be very draining. And not all friends or families or our families understand it. And sometimes it could be a real downer, because you want to be able to get together with like your closest friends in your family, but they're constantly either disparaging or denouncing you for like what's happening with your child and why are these behaviors occurring. So you don't want anything to be counterproductive or really create more stress in your life. So just, again, persevere. It's okay as far as if you are struggling, because we all go through those, but I know what you're going through, and you'll get through it, and just take one step at a time. It's a journey, and and I'm excited to help as many families as I can achieve the level of health that our children should be able to.
That is great, great, great advice again. And so I know our listeners they're going to want to find you. So where can they find you?
So thank you. They can find me on Facebook or Instagram at my handle is My Hope Wellness. And my website is myhopewellness.com. And then my email is myhopewellness@gmail.com. So pretty easy to remember, being, that same one across
Yeah.
the board.
Yeah, that's great. And I also mentioned your bio that everyone listened to. So I think it's important for our listeners, when they hear someone like you being interviewed that has done such great work, your book, where can we find your book?
So that is on my website, and it's downloadable for free. So it's at myhopewellness.com, and there'll be a at the top ebook. And if you just click on the ebook, you'll be able to download that for free.
Okay, because they're going to want to know that. I know that for sure, because
Sure.
well, it's been an honor, Dr. Larry, for you to be on Mother's Guide Through Autism. So thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Likewise, it's been an honor and a privilege. And, I look forward to connecting again very soon.
Absolutely. You come back anytime, because I think we did get some great information today. So absolutely, we plan on having you back.
Great. Thank you so much again.
So for those of you that have joined us today, if you enjoyed this episode of A Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast, please subscribe to help us send out the message of knowledge, hope, and inspiration. I'll see you in the next episode.